Now let's talk about interacting with the SQLite shell. So we're not getting to structured query language statements yet. This is how we're going to be interacting with the database system itself. So we're going to be using period command, and that is how we send instructions directly to the database server. We're not going to be putting semicolons at the end because those are SQL statements for when we are creating records, creating tables, interacting with the database in that way. So we can go through and basically a lot of this is just, you can just sit there and take a look at it and see what it says type of deal. So the big thing here is that if all you do is you call SQLite 3 itself, so SQLite 3 and nothing else, the important thing to understand there is that that is going to create a temporary database for you that will not be saved when you exit. When you do .exit to exit, then all the data, all the tables, everything you just spent hours upon hours creating goes away. So what you can do is if you accidentally create a temporary database and you realize that, you can use the backup command, so .backup, and then you plug in whatever you want the database name to be, then that will then save that temporary database file into an actual database file, for you to, and you won't have to, do anything else. When you close out, your information will be saved. Again, as far as the extension is concerned, the .db, this is just something for you. So again, with SQLite and a lot of things like in the Linux and the Python world, you don't actually need extensions. You do not need an extension, but then if you don't have an extension, many times you don't know what that file is. So putting a .db at the end is actually, it's more about for your use case than it is about the SQLite server itself. So that's just for you. If you want to open a specific database or to create one, again, by calling a database name, this will either open it or create it. SQLite space, again, example.db, that will open the example.d database. If you want to see what tables are in the database, you can do .tables, and that will simply give you a list of the tables. If you want to see the schema, so the schema is basically how those tables were created, you can do .schema, and again here it says create table, people, name and age. It shows you how that table was created. One of the useful things, if you're actually going to be interacting with your records directly through the shell, is to turn headers on. And so when you do like a select all, or when you do a select statement many times, basically you just get the columns, right? Name, age, sex, whatever. But sometimes you're not really sure what that is supposed to be. What column is that? And so all headers on does is it shows you what the column names are. So you know what the column names are. That can be a very useful thing. Within SQLite itself, you can ask what version it is. So you can do .version, and that will give you the version that you're running under. You can actually do things like export data to a CSV. So with this, you can change the mode. So you change the mode to the CSV. You change output to like backup.csv, and what's going to happen here is every time you run a SQL statement, a select or whatever, the output is going to be sent to that CSV file, and then basically this is just showing you, I opened this up in whatever the Excel version on Apple is, and this can kind of show you what the output was. And then to change the output back to the shell, you can just simply do SQLite period output, and that changes that back to the shell. Now, I did this before in one of the other classes, but in case you missed that class or you just want a refresh of what I showed you, again, if we are going to use SQLite, so we can do SQLite 3 space example.db. And again, the important thing is to know where you're at in your operating system, where you are in your file structure. So I'm on the desktop. So it will look to the desktop to see if this file exists. If the file exists, it will connect to it. If it doesn't exist, it will create it. So if you run this and then you get into your database and then you look for tables or whatever else and nothing is there, don't worry, most likely your data is fine. You just either moved your database file somewhere else or you're in the wrong location, right, for calling that particular file. So you just need to figure out how to get to that location, right? So we hit enter. Again, we'll see SQLite, so making sure we see that SQLite command prompt there. And then from here, again, we can do things like tables, right? We can do tables, and we can see people, roster, student, right? If I want to see the schema for the tables, how were those created? And do schema. So create table people, name and age, create table student, name sex, create table roster, name, age, and sex. Now what you'll notice if I do select, let's say all from people. So this is a SQL statement. This is a SQL statement. This is basically what I'm teaching in a series of classes, right? So it's going to select basically name and age, right? Then I hit enter. And so we can see Pat, Tim, 22, Sue, 44, Pat, 33, blah, blah, blah. But you'll notice there's no headers there. There's no headers. Crap. Is this the first name? Is this the last name? What is that? I mean, obviously we know what it is, but maybe we don't know the number, something like that. So what we can do here is we can do dot headers space on. Again, we're not going to get a response because it worked. And then we do select all from people again. And then when we scroll up, we can see, oh, okay, the first column is name, second column is age, so that is something that might be useful for us, when we're going through and we're actually doing something a little more heavy duty with trying to deal with data in this particular database. So this is the basic idea of what we're talking about. We're talking about interacting with the database. Again, the commands that go to the database server start with a period. Period tables, period version, period schema, period headers on, right? The SQL statements, how we interact with the records, that uses a semicolon at the end. And of course, the most important command you can never forget, or whatever shell you're in, is exit. How the hell to get out. Period exit is how you get out. So that's the basic idea behind the shell commands for SQLite and basically how to be able to interact with the database server itself to be able to do the administrative tasks you may need to do with SQLite. Now if you use period help, that will show you all of the commands, and as with many of the things I'll teach you in different classes, is there are far more options than what I'm going to go close to showing you in this particular series of classes. So as you do start to create more complicated projects, it may be worth it for you to do some additional research to see what other options are available for you. You might find some functionality that 99% of the time absolutely doesn't matter, but in your particular use case could be a lifesaver. So to look at those different commands, you can go period help. That will give you a list of all the different commands, or of course you can just simply Google search it or look at ChatGPT to better understand what these different commands are. But that's the basic idea for interacting directly with the shell before we get to the SQL statements.